Good morning and welcome to this Father's Day edition of our Sunday School Hour. We're Happy Father's Day to the men. You know, you may not be waking up to breakfast and flowers and candy, all the other things, but you are loved. Uh, this morning, I had to get myself together on the drive. My son had called me, and man, it was just a powerful Father's Day message. He said it was too long to text, and he just had to tell me. And so, Jared, you got me this morning.
Good.
You got me. But anyway, today is not just Father's Day, but here at 8th Street is our Men's Day celebration as well. Last month, the women on the third Sunday did such a marvelous job, and we're looking forward to them on the third Sunday of July to come back as well. But today, I wanted to do something a little different. Something that I think is needed for our church in particular. I want to have just a conversation with our pastor. A lot of times we think we know people, and we know them, but I like for you, you as parishioners and those of you that are interested in our church to know our pastor, to know his mind, what he's been through, what he's learned. And so, without further ado, welcome,
Thank you, sir.
Pastor Slack.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for the invitation and the creativity for this. Yeah.
yes. So we're gonna get right to it. Thank you, as always, to his wonderful wife that leads our media team, and the others that's helping her with this service this morning. Just want to start off our conversation just with a simple question. When did you come to faith? And if you can explain when you were saved.
So I think there's some misconceptions. You know, when people think about coming to faith, they think that that's the day that you walk down the aisle, get baptized, and all that kind of thing. So I was baptized in the first grade. And I did it because all the other kids did it. And, you know, you do that. Everybody was talking around the table. So-and-so got baptized. And then when it came time to be baptized at our church picnic, once a year, they would do all the baptisms in a lake. And I refused to be baptized in the lake. The lake was called the State Park, and everybody was swimming, and I looked and saw all the bugs, and I wouldn't get baptized there. So the following month, I got in trouble with my grandparents because I didn't get baptized, and all the churches came together, and I had to get baptized. A church called Galilee Baptist had a baptismal pool, one of the first churches to have a baptismal pool, and I got baptized there because the water was clean. I didn't want to get baptized in the dirty water. But it wasn't until I was 10, turning 11, the fall of my 10th year, I was 10 years old, that I got saved. It was during a revival. Pastor came in town. And that was the night that I actually knew that I had been converted, that I felt, you know, the tug of God. Because up until then, you know, you saw somebody else do it, you did it. And, you know, the conversation was at the church, everybody gave their life to Christ. But it wasn't until that moment, that night, and I never walked the aisle. That's the other critical thing for me coming to faith. Though I was taught that the day you felt the change, you came down, I didn't come down because one, I didn't want to face, the reputation that the first time I came was a farce. But then but after that, others knew that I had been converted. It was something that they saw that was different. And so it was at that time that I started seeing, seeing and seeking God. I was attracted to those that were a little older than I was, that were more serious. And so we had young adult department, we had a teenage department, and then we had a youth department. I gravitated more to the younger adults because they had more structure. It was more people that looked like me versus the young and the teenagers had older folks teaching. You know what I mean? And so it was kind of that do as I do, big mama class again. And so since I had that at home, I didn't want that in the class. I wanted to be someone closer. So somebody in their 18, 19, 20-year-old, that was the closest model I had for a teacher that didn't look like my grandparents. The age gap was still there, but it was closer.
Okay, so you initially were playing church.
Yes, that would be the best way to explain that.
But at the age of 10, you were converted. And not only could you feel the conversion inside, as you've been preaching the Joseph series, people could see that the Lord was with you at that age.
Yeah.
And really to kind of transition to the next question, because you're known as a kid preacher, somebody that started preaching at a very early age, and if you can just give us a little idea about what it was like being in ministry. First of all, tell us the age you started preaching, and then what it was like to be a child at work, at school, and even in church, going through that type of transition in life.
I think ultimately, as a kid, there was for me a sense of longing. So as a kid preacher, young person going to school, there was a cloud of shame, because ultimately, the kids shied away from you. You know what I mean? You didn't have a whole lot of friends unless you went to church with somebody that you went to school with. But the other part that I think that was very big for me, separating the preacher and the kid, was I didn't have a father figure that I wanted. So I had one in my grandfather, who was born in 1912. Everybody hears me talk about his, the year that he was born. But it was nothing like having a father that come to church, or school, or to the ball game that looked like all the other kids' father. So when my granddad showed up, he had a pair of Big Smiths on, or another pair of overalls. I can't think of the name of them, but that's what he wore. You know what I mean? And so for that really had a big effect on me. Almost to the extent that there were times I would intentionally not tell them when I had something going on, so he wouldn't show up. So I looked like, the other kids. And then the part for ministry, being a kid preacher, I believe that for me, the calling as a kid was very unique, but it was very humbling. My grandparents, especially my grandmother, her brother was our founding pastor of our home church, Norman Mitchell. He was he was the leader of the family. And there's a lot of us that were preachers and pastors, but my grandmother was very heavy-handed. And she would always say, you're going to learn that Bible before you preach it. So it was a lot of, discipline to read, a lot of discipline to remember, a lot of, tell me what you read this week, remind to me. So it was that kind of thing. And then I had normal chores like other kids, and stuff like that. But when I would go place to preach, they would ask her, could I come, or my grandparents. And so they would raise a little offering for you, and of course I thought the offering was supposed to be for whatever I wanted. I love bomb pops, those red and white and blue popsicles, and that'd be the first thing I'd want to go get, you know, in my mind. And she would be more heavy-handed. She'd say, no, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get you a book, or we're gonna get you a pair of dress shoes, or we're gonna get you a shirt. And so her idea, going back to the kid, as a kid, her idea of what I needed wasn't my idea of what I needed. So I didn't dress trendy. We had the parachute pants. I don't know if you remember them. And we had back then we had the K-Swifts tennis shoes, and we had Reeboks. They had just came out. So those were things that I wanted. But she didn't feel like spending that kind of money on a pair of shoes was necessary. So, you know, her aspects of it was, you know what, you don't need that, you're gonna grow out of that. So in terms of that, going back to that shame, it made me look at things different, you know, because I didn't have the opportunity to look like my peers. And then there was that reputation, hey, guess what, he's the kid preacher. So, you know, I didn't get a chance to go and do like the other kids did, you know. But I did go to the after game parties, you know, and stuff like that. Sadie Hawkins, it was a dance we had in school. But I couldn't do anything, but I could sit there and watch everybody else. So it was kind of one of those unique things as a younger person growing into things. And it plays into a bigger picture later.
And what was your age?
So I started preaching at 12, and then it was high school years where I noticed the noticeable change. Those were the years that I think were the hardest. And what I mean by that is, it was at that point that I knew that, one, my grandfather was not my dad. I knew that. And then I had to really embrace the idea that I did not have what I wanted. Because keep in mind, I was measuring myself next to other kids. So their parents came, you know, and you saw their dad, or the single parent kids had somebody, you know, that looked their age to come in. It was a few of us that were reared by grandparents, but that really, you know, impacted me. And so in the spring of the year, my grandparents said that they wanted me to, I already knew him, but they wanted me to have a relationship with my biological dad. And so it was a kind of an eerie feeling, wasn't a lot of excitement, you know, a lot of questions, wanting to know, you know, a lot of different things. What happened? How did I end up like this? You know, all that kind of thing. So when I met him, the first 10 minutes that I met him, and I know I'm trying to give you some things that really impacted me. First 10 minutes that I met him, he got high, and I never forgot it. And so after meeting him, I turned around, I stayed the summer, and I went home, because we had a church thing at our home church, to go back. And I was supposed to come back, I never went back. I stayed with my grandparents because I didn't like what I had saw. And so that pushed me even more into my calling. It immersed me, you know, really to, you know, find out what God's purpose was, God's reasoning, and all that kind of stuff. So that played a real big impact. Just that first experience to that side of my family, which you've heard me talk about, isn't the best Christian side, but they're good people. They just got their hang-ups at that time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, speaking about, I mean, it is Father's Day. And man, how did you marry your calling, your need for having a picture that looked like everybody else, and then when you finally got a look at the picture, it wasn't what you hoped it to be. And you said, so you mentioned that you dived really kind of deeper into your calling in ministry. So that was how did you? So you were preaching. You were as the young preacher, but then you all actually during your teenage years had a particular calling. Through that to actually lead a church.
Yeah, that was, if you don't mind me interrupting, that was, as you're thinking, I was my 15th year birthday, turning 16 is when I had that very big experience. Yeah, and as I told you earlier, my grandmother and grandfather really was heavy-handed, so they chose where I preached. I was preaching revival. Back then, I didn't know it like I know it now, but everybody likes to see the young kid preacher, so I preached a lot of different places, and I imitated Leo Daniels almost to wherever you would close your eyes, you'd almost think I was him. Because that's who I listened to. And then, of course, we had a lot of other preachers who my uncles was friends with that came to our house, because that's where preachers ate. They ate at people's house back then. But so St. John, North Richmond, California, or El Cerrito, California, had heard me, and they wanted to extend the call. They saw some potential, but so their deal was with my grandparents, we'll call him as pastor, but he won't be the pastor until he finishes high school, finishes college, then we'll let him be the pastor. And so that didn't sit too well with me, because again, that was me being under my grandparents' thumb, you know what I mean, being told what to do, how to do it, you know, when to go, when to eat, and all that kind of stuff. And El Cerrito was an outskirt of Richmond, California, really large church. And then there was my first church, which was 97 miles away. And they saw me grow up, and so they extended the call to me. And I think strongly because somebody else thought I was worth being a pastor that influenced that church. And so New Hope, 603 South Baltimore, Pasco, Washington, was the biggest church in that city. Back then, our youth and young adult choir had about 98 voices. Our mass choir was about 70. We had a number of different usher departments, much like all the other churches back then. And they let me be the pastor. They let me. I got a chance to go sign up and get my own apartment. 2748 West Sylvester Street, apartment 27. That's my first place. So I had my own set of keys, but I didn't know that my grandmother was going to just start dropping in. So she'd come in and play like she was cleaning up, or, wanted to check in on me. And they made sure that I went to school. They made sure I went to school every day. And matter of fact, I got in trouble because I stopped going. I was missing days. I can't remember what it was. I was just doing my thing. And I think that was when I started shifting to act my age. The Sunday morning was a Sunday, but I never forget, I was preaching after church, and my best friend, DeAndre Jones, came, and we were going out of town, and I had my clothes on, church clothes on, and I changed my clothes, met him, and we left. And that's when I started acting my age and started doing it. I never drank or nothing like that, but I wanted to have fun, because up until then, 16, 17 years old, I hadn't had that freedom to, go and do. And I was smart enough never to do it, act my age in town. So we would drive 2 and 3 hours, different places, to have fun. And I think that's where, when you talk about in terms of, life and my balance in preaching and my age, I think that's when that really became, that's when I really saw who I, found out the person I was outside of that. Up until then, and I will say this, I read the Bible from the time I was 12 every year, the whole Bible front and back, every year religiously. I would start reading it, and by the time I got to Revelation, I'd put it down, and then the next year I'd start right back over, and I'd read it chronologically every day, a chapter, a verse, or sometimes more than one chapter. And I just read the whole thing because my grandmother wanted to make sure that I knew that book. So up until then, that was what I did. And then when I never will forget it, once I turned 17/18, I stopped reading it every day. my reading the Bible for the whole year, I stopped and I just started reading pockets. And it wasn't then, it wasn't at that moment that I didn't see myself drifting to becoming, you know, what I felt like I had lost or missed out on.
So, man, you just gave us a whole lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, but to speak about the struggle, going from a child to a teenager, and, you know, that transition, even physically, puberty, and then to go from that teenager to man, and still pastoring a church. I mean, what was that struggle like?
Ironically, I had a deacon at the time, two deacons that were really, really kind, that saw me drifting. One in particular, well, both are gone to heaven. One was named Milton Norwood, and the other was named M.B. Sparks. Never did know his first initials, what his name, what it meant. But I think they saw that I was searching for a model, role model, and that I was resenting having a grandfather. I wanted again, even as a young adult man, a man, no matter what he wants, or a man child, he wants his father. That goes without saying. No matter how good of a job a mother can do, a man wants to know who his dad is, what his dad's about, what kind of, you know, what his dad's ambitions were, what was his dreams. You know, those are things that you can't take away. And even subconsciously, I believe that every man still wants to know who his dad is behind the scenes, not the guy that walks in the room, puts on the, you know, the air that I'm the head of the household, the guy when he's with his friends or behind. So going back to your question, it was during that time that I struggled with manhood because I did not have the model I wanted. I had a model in the person of my grandfather, but it wasn't the model I wanted. And so I never will forget, my grandfather was on his, he was declining, and my grandmother said, I want you to go see your granddad, he's sick, he's in the hospital. And anybody know my grandfather, 6'6", tall, real stocky, corn-fed, just a worker. Walked probably anywhere and everywhere, never had a driver's license. And so when I went to go see him, he then started saying, you need to be a man. And that kept staying in my mind. Be a man, be a man. And as I was struggling with his manhood, he always would say to me, Wallace, men raise their kids. And that just, you know, bothered me because I was looking at some of the other of my siblings, uncles, I call them siblings because they're not much older than me. And I did, you know, and I was like, Wallace men raise their kids, Wallace men raise their kids. And so he knew I had drifted because he was saying in so many words, you getting ready to be a dad because you out there doing whatever you want to do, you just slick. And so manhood came when Jerain was born. And with the day Jerain was born, I never will forget it. I left the hospital because I had a speeding ticket I had to go to court for. And we had beepers then. You remember those little beepers that used to vibrate? You had it in your pocket. Everybody thought they was cool when they had a beeper. So the beeper went off, and the judge asked me why I had it on. And I was literally in traffic court. And I said, well, my son is being born, and I never will forget it. He let me off the hook. And I went back to the hospital for Jerain's birth. And I looked at him and I said, now how am I going to take him home? Because as a church person, I could not come home knowing I had a son at a wedlock. Not to mention I was pastoring too. So that changed the whole complexion. So for a whole year and a half, I lived in a fog, in a tunnel. Because I had to figure out how I was going to face the music. I guess that'd be the best way to say it. So manhood to me actually became in terms of starting to accept responsibility. So I would go and buy diapers and do the stuff I was supposed to do. I always had Jerain with me. Never one time did I never, because I always heard that in the back of my mind. My granddad said, be a man, we raise our kids, be a man. So I didn't know what being a man was other than what I saw him do for me and my other cousins. So I patterned or I mimicked what I saw him do, but I didn't know how to take him home. So what I did was, I knew I had to take him home, and I knew I had to tell him. And so the only way to do it was just to bring him. So that was the longest drive ever, 97 miles. It was the longest drive ever. And I never will forget it. Jerraine had just started walking, opened up the door. Jerraine took off, jumped out of my arms, ran into my grandmother's arms. She didn't even know him. He didn't know her. And it was game over. And it was like he solved all my problems in 5 seconds. Just ran in, jumped. I mean, he didn't even know her. And ran in and just jumped in her arm. And my granddad looked at me and said, this is a good looking kid. He said, now you're gonna do a good job, right? He said, you remember what I told you? And when he said that, the pressure, one lifted, and it was exchanged. One pressure lifted in terms of guilt and shame, and another one sat on me because now I had to figure out how to be this man, and now how do I tell my church that I had a son? Because there were rumors out, and all the other boys had kids, they had all started, having, babies and stuff like that. But keep in mind that you didn't do this unless you stood in front of the church. So now I had to stand in front of the church and say, hey, guess what? I got a kid. And so that was the other loop. And my grandparents he never told me when, you got to stand in front of the church. He never said or asked when I was going to. He just constantly reiterated, you know how I raised you. You know how I raised you. You know how I raised you. And he wouldn't, and that in itself added pressure. So one of the things that I believe helped me the most was I had a godfather who was very instrumental, because that's what we had as kids coming up. Everybody was your uncle, everybody was your auntie. You always had somebody, God something, play dad, whatever. And so he was very instrumental in helping me in manhood. And so what ended up happening was my church, I went and told him. I went and told my deacons and I told my leaders that I had Jerraine, and they said, hey, you need to get married. Well, I kicked against that because that's not what I wanted to do. So they had a vote to vote me out. I wanted to vote. But I never will forget, there was a preacher named F.A. Allen, Franzie Allen, and said to me, he said, you won the vote, but you lost the church. And so my grandmama, who took it so hard, I thought she had the baby. She said, you done made a mess of things and you've disgraced us, our name, our family. And I went back to the church and gave them my 30-day notice. Now I'm 18, 19 years old. And that was the first time that I ever really started embracing consequences, manhood. Now you got this woman that, and you got a baby, and you're gonna have to figure this out. So it was at that point, it was like all of that rebellion, all of that, very crafty, being silk, I would say satin, in terms of water shedding, hiding. That's when all of that really caught up, and that's the moment where manhood really became concrete, which also was big because my granddad died. August of that year, third week of August, he passed away. And so now I had no choice but to really settle in and find out what manhood was like. And so and again, that's just bringing up, as I've said, that shame and that hiding and not having a succinct role model that I wanted. And then after he died, everything that I didn't like about him was the things I treasured. Yeah.
That's, anyway, we're having, and I'm just kind of what they would call not really a commercial break, but just reminding those that may be just coming in and tuning in that, we're having a conversation for Father's Day with the man of God, and he's been just revealing some transitional things. I mean, here you are, man. You know, you kind of downplayed things a little bit because you weren't just a kid preacher in that area. You were actually a national kid preacher. So it wasn't just the fact about, you know, you feeling like you was alienated from that church, but just dealing with somebody that was popular within that circle, nationally, and now here you are, a man without a home.
Yeah, you know, and the irony of it is when my grandfather died the third week of August in 94 is when he died, third week of 94, and I was no longer pastoring. Manhood really sunk in, and as I said earlier, that pressure of what it meant to be a man, to be a father, was big, and it didn't help that I had been paraded around from the time I was 12 to the time I was 18 as this kid wonder boy preacher. You know what I mean? That did not help. So the guilt and the shame, and then when I had to tell the whole church community, I had actually, I had to stand up. It was on a night, and I had to tell all of the churches that I had a kid. So that was huge. So how I responded, I got angry with God. And this, since I'm in, you want to ask me to be as close to the truth as possible with being comfortable. I was so angry, I took all my suits to the cleaners. To 18th Street and Yesler, there was a cleaners that all of the people went to that was white. And I took all of my suits to that cleaners and dropped them off because I knew no black people would know me. Never went back and got them. And left all of my Bible books in the apartment and never went back. It was at that point that I had made up in my mind, since God allowed me to go through all this and took my granddad when I needed him the most, I was done with ministry. And it didn't help that the shame and the ridicule and the chirping from others, that played a big part of it too. And so I was trying to find jobs to take care of Jerain because I knew that that's what I was taught to do. So I think that was probably some of my darkest years. Those were some of my darker years. And so a guy named H.B. Sampson, who was a good friend of mine, and J. Andrew Bowles, who are gone, they saw me and they would say, go to church. And I was so angry that I would sit in the back of the church and I'd just cry the whole time because that's where I didn't want to be at. That's the last place I wanted to be, was in church. And so they just kept pushing me to go to church. And now I'm at age 20. And that one of those evenings, I took my first drink. I'll never forget it. My best friend DeAndre took me out. And the guy that was serving us drinks stopped serving me because he said, anybody that drank as much as you drink and is sober, he said, you must have a God problem. And it was at that point I became even more angry. Because I said, well, here's a time to be what everybody else is being. I couldn't be it in high school. Now I can get a chance to be it here. And you would think that, I'd get a chance to see what all this myth about drinking and this hype was, other than how expensive it was. So it was at that moment that I think things started turning around for me, because I heard God speaking through people that I didn't know. And the bartender guy wouldn't serve me anymore. So me and Connie we were on and off. We were really battling because, at that time I was trying to find myself. A lot of anger, a lot of rage, a lot of unforgiveness, a lot of resentment. And so, and I'm talking about at God, not people. Just that, because at the time, as I said earlier, the role model that I didn't want was the role model that I wanted. Yeah. And so with God taking him, that was such a big turning point in my life. And so at that point, I think that what I ended up doing was I started going to church more. And that's when I think the healing process, because it was all out. So now that all my business was out, everybody knew, I didn't have to put on no facade. I didn't have to, dress up anymore, in terms of appealing, that it just made it simpler for me to start being who I was. And at the time I was working 2 jobs to take care of Jeraine. Me and Connie, and so I had a regular job like everybody else, and we shared a car everywhere we went, and then Jarrell came along. So when Jarrell came along, that's when me and Connie had got married, and we had got it right, and we were trying to do things, the right way. But she wasn't a Christian like I was a Christian, you know what I mean? So that was a different challenge in itself, when you got somebody that's, when you're, better way to say it is unequally yoked, when you have that. So me and the kids, me and Jeraine and Jarrell, we went, and Connie would go to work, but again, it was those 2 jobs. So God started putting men in my life, like the late Dr. J.J. Woods, and that's now me moving here to Kansas City. That was real big, and even he was one that said, hey, you need to start preaching again. You need to get yourself back. Because again, keep in mind, I didn't want nothing to do with church. So I still, up until coming back to Kansas City, I still wasn't doing church. Now I had started reading my Bible again, and that's when I started reading it again like I did in my earlier years, from Genesis to Revelation. And that's why I said that was real big, because I didn't notice the drift until. And so probably, and it's been a devotion of mine to read the Bible, not because I got to preach, but to read it from the front to the back every year, just to stay fresh with what God was saying. And so J.J. Woods was instrumental in getting me back into the preaching. Matter of fact, I bought my first suit for preaching here in Kansas City. Yeah, because up until then, I made it a point to not wear a suit, so that way I didn't get called on and I didn't get asked to do anything. And I think those were some moments where I started seeing the shift.
So you're in Kansas City now, and you're working, and God's call is still there. You might have tried to cancel it out, but He never canceled it out. And so now you're. How did you get back into the pastorate?
Actually, to be honest with you, it was very unique when I came to Kansas City. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to do church. I didn't. I went because H.B. Sampson and J. Andrew Bowles. And H.B. Sampson, very instrumental, very influential minister, and J. Andrew Bowles, who was very instrumental, had told me to start, making my way back to church. So when I came here, I initially was supposed to go to Wallace Hartsfield's church because that's where I was sent. But because I didn't want to be in church, Wallace Hartsfield was a friend of our family, because we had those old preacher groups stuck together. They were like a fraternity group. So they all, once you got in that group, and ironically, and that play, I'll tell you about this a little later on, I never knew that I would end up here because my uncle Norman Mitchell and Dr. Henderson were friends. And matter of fact, eulogized my uncle, so I never knew that. Just weird how things turned out. But long story short, they had a 7 last sayings of Jesus, and they asked me to preach. That's when I went and got the suit. And just to show you how rebellious I was, I stood up and preached without reading it. Purposely didn't want to study, with the hopes that no one would call me. They asked me to ever do it again because I liked sitting in the back. And J.J. Woods said, hey, next time you get up, I want you to study. And I said, okay. He knew. And what I did was I went back to my default mechanism. I imitated Leo Daniels. And he said, I wonder what you sound like. Yeah, and so that is where things started. I don't think that's where things started turning around. But I'd started learning how to be a man at that time, working. And I had some of the most how would you say, unbeknown mentors to come along and just drop little nuggets. Because at that time, again, the mentor I wanted was in heaven. And so little pieces just started, coming, and that's how I ended up back in ministry. And J.J. Wood sent me to Topeka to preach at a church called New Jerusalem. And I went there, and Connie, who was an unbeliever, said, God didn't bring us here to go to Topeka. If he told you Kansas City, we're going to be in Kansas City. And then I ended up, ironically, and I'm trying to fast track because I know we're running out of time, I ended up being at the church named the same name as the one I messed up at. And I never will forget when they called me as pastor on a Tuesday night. God so clearly spoke to me and said, I'm going to give you what you left so you won't forget how you got here. Only difference was this church only had 16 people. The other church had 500. So I said, this ain't the same. And then that church just started growing. It was like somebody had just turned water on, and it was all young people like my age. But I never could get past where God wanted me. And so it just took me, in a different direction. What I mean, where God wanted me in terms of maturity, there was a maturity piece that had to come in. And so, yeah, that's the long and short end of that answer. How did I get back? Yeah.
So, got like 7 minutes left. And thank you. One of the things that I wanted, and it's kind of like even with Karita and some of the other ladies last month. Thank you for being revealing.
You're welcome.
I think it's good for men, and for you to lead that, so people can see that it's okay to share your pain,
Yeah.
your disappointments, your struggles, the things that everybody knows about you. But we still try to get up here and hide. I don't believe most people knew about you, but so now you're transitioning. You went from a ready-made church as a teenager to now a church that was the name.
Yeah.
It had a name.
Yeah. Yeah, it had a lot of hints at my past.
Yeah.
One of the things that was ironic, since you brought that up, when I got called to New Hope and Independence, I went home to visit. And I told you about the cleaners, right? That I went to off of Yesler Street in Kansas City. Ran into a friend of mine. This is honest to goodness, if she was watching, she'd know that she'd probably be surprised I remembered. And when I went to the cleaners, it was a white person's cleaners because black folks didn't go there. She happened to go there for some reason and saw my clergy robes there and knew they were mine and bought them and gave them to me.
Wow.
Paid the bill, gave them to me, and I was like, her name was Andretta York, and we grew up in the same time. So when she gave them to me, she said, hey, I saw this, and I knew it was yours, and I saw your name in it after I bought it. I paid the bill, not bought it, paid the bill. She said, so here, she said, I've been waiting. She said, I didn't know you would, and it was literally about 6 months after I had been. So everything I had at the first church robe, now I had at this church, even down to the Bible that was in one of the suit coats. It was all preserved. And it just was like God said, hey, let's start over fresh. And so that was big. But the church was different. We had a lot of debt, had no building, couldn't get a loan. Credit was bad. My credit was bad. It was a mess. And a guy at Boatman's Bank, that's when Nations Bank was Nations Bank, not Bank of America, gave us a loan, and we paid the loan off. I can't remember how much it was, a little over $180,000. We paid it off in 3 years. Block and a half, paid off the loan, bought 2 buses, paid the buses off, remodeled the church. I think it was like $70,000, paid that off. And so now we're in the year 12, and the church is just full of people. And it was amazing, but I still worked a full-time job, and I still pastored because young people don't pay money. So even though you come and you see all these younger people, we didn't have a solid base. But it taught me money management, it taught me problem solving, it taught me thinking skills, and then it was a good place where me and Connie actually became partners. And that was the church where we actually became not husband and wife on paper, but husband and wife in spiritual yokemanship. Didn't mean we still didn't,
Well, no,
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
I think 1 Corinthians 7,
yeah,
28 says, you to get married will have trouble.
yeah. So,
Something like that.
yeah.
So,
I hope that answers your question, though.
yeah. We got a couple of minutes for the viewers. We'll probably go a few minutes over here for those that's here, because, man, you're sharing a lot. But just speak just a little about your transition from New Hope to A Street.
Never saw that coming. Never saw it coming. Matter of fact, I didn't even know where H Street was. I didn't know who H Street was. I didn't know where it was. I didn't even know the name of the church. I had planned, and you know this, I had planned to go to Denver, Colorado. There's a church called Central. I went there, and you couldn't tell me I was not going to Central Baptist. Dream Sanctuary, Dream Church. Trustee lady loved me. Deacon, chairman loved me. I thought that's where I was going. And I never forget, they voted that night. I got 14 votes. The other guy got like 300. And I couldn't tell it because of the way they responded to me. But anyway, Robert Bainham called me because I felt abandoned because everything I had tried at New Hope wasn't working. We tried to buy buildings. The buildings weren't, I couldn't get the buildings bought. We tried to buy land. The land I bought, but I couldn't get a building permit on it. I mean, just nothing was working. So I thought maybe God was moving. So Robert Bainham called me and said, hey, man, I want you to put in for H Street. And I was like, nah, I don't want no church in Kansas City. I'm good. So I went fishing on Sunday morning, didn't go to church.